Hey guys, today we're talking about the abolitionist movement. We're going to talk about some leaders and some of the major arguments surrounding it. Your objective question today is, how did the abolitionists gain support and what were the arguments against the movement? So remember, we talked yesterday about what abolition means, right? If you abolish something, it means you do away with it. So in the lens of U.S. history, especially during this time period, abolition refers to abolishing slavery, so doing away with slavery. So abolitionists are anti-slavery; they want slavery to end. All right. So there was some early opposition. Anti-slavery societies, people who were pushing for the end of slavery, thought that the best way to get an end to slavery would be doing it gradually. If all of a sudden we were just to snap our fingers and all of a sudden slavery was illegal, the South's economy would completely fall apart because so much of their economy is based around the free labor of the slave system. So a lot of early anti-slavery and abolitionist groups believed that gradually ending slavery was going to be the best reason, or the best outcome. They also believe that, you should compensate slave owners for them losing their slaves because, a lot of most slave owners view their slaves as investments. They pay a lot of money up front, but over the years, that slave will work them forever and potentially, create more slaves that will, continue to live underneath them. So there was some idea and concept of ending it gradually and, compensating the South. There was also another group formed called the American Colonization Society. This society was founded in 1817, so we're going way back at this point. They believed that slavery was also based around racism, that a majority of people in the United States, even if slavery was outlawed, would still think they were, better than black people and that black people should be separate. And so the ACS, which was backed by a lot of really famous people, James Madison, James Monroe, Henry Clay, right? These really famous people we've been talking about, got behind this idea of taking all of the African Americans out of America and sending them back to Africa. They thought that this would be the best thing to do. That way they wouldn't be slaves anymore. They'd be back with their people, and America would be white, and Africa would be black. That was the idea, right? Now, the whole idea of sending them back to Africa, maybe to them made sense, but there's a lot of issues here. Africa is its own continent, right? With its own countries and tribes and stuff like that. You can't just show up and dump a bunch of people on the coastline of a continent and sail away and think they'll be all right. So we founded this little tiny area on the African coast called Liberia. Will eventually become Liberia. They're going to draft up a constitution. It's going to be like a little tiny United States for black people, for slaves. Unfortunately, this is just not going to work. There's a lot of issues with this. One, it's really expensive to ship people across the the coast, especially if you're taking care of them instead of like the Middle Passage kind of thing. And also, the African Americans that live in America at this point were born there. These are people who have never been to Africa. Like, why would we send them back? The United States is their home. So in the end, only about 12,000 people are actually going to transition back over to Africa or to Africa, and it kind of just falls apart for a variety of reasons. However, and that was 1817, right? That was a while ago. But the abolition movement starts to gain a lot more support, and one of the reasons that it's going to gain more support is the Second Great Awakening. Remember, we have some new religions coming to light. We have the idea of, redevoting yourself to the Lord and stuff, and a lot of those religions view slavery as evil or a sin. So this is a problem for a lot of people who have now, become more religious and now have a problem with slavery that didn't so much before. We're going to talk about a lot of people and their contributions. Let's just run through them real quick. David Walker. Walker was a free African American. He starts to publish the Appeal for the Colored Citizens of the World. He's basically saying, listen, all the black people in this country, the only way slavery is going to end is if we rebel. We need to use violence. We need to spill blood. It's the only way. Okay, so one abolitionist that thinks blood needs to happen. William Lloyd Garrison, another famous abolitionist. He believed that this whole gradual thing's not going to work out. Slavery's evil. It needs to end right now. All black people right now should be free. The Grimby sisters, they were actually born in South Carolina. Their father was a very wealthy plantation owner. They moved to the North. They were outspoken against slavery, much to their father's anger, and they also are going to fight for women's rights. What we'll see as we continue through is that oftentimes abolitionists and women's rights advocates go hand in hand. And that's just one example of that. Frederick Douglass, Lord, published the North Star. This is a very famous anti-slavery newspaper, and he's one of the most famous abolitionists. We'll talk about him later. Elijah Lovejoy, he's going to run an anti-slavery newspaper. And a bunch of the people don't like that, so they start to burn his shop, his warehouse. He runs out saying, no, don't do that, and a mob kills him. All right, so pro-slavery people kill Elijah Lovejoy, who was an abolitionist. Now, when this man finds out that Lovejoy has been murdered, John Brown goes on what I like to call a rampage. He tries to avenge Lovejoy's death with a series of, rampages. His goal is to gain a bunch of weapons, supply the weapons to slaves, and then him and his white followers and all the slaves he's armed are all going to raise up together and overthrow slavery. This doesn't work. After Harper's Ferry, he's captured. The reason I'm kind of being vague is because you guys are going to read about him, and I don't want to give too much away, but he's captured and executed. This is a great quote from John Brown. As he's about to be hung, we say, is there any less words? He says, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done. John Brown's basically saying, listen, y'all, the only way this great evil, right, which is slavery, is going to be done away with is with blood, and a lot of it. And he's basically prefacing the Civil War. He's absolutely right. And at this point, a majority of Americans are probably on the same page about this. This is a big issue that surrounds, every aspect of the society, and war is going to have to happen to end it. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she's an abolitionist from the North. She's going to write a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is really important because it's going to be published throughout the country, a lot in the North, and the Northerners are going to read about it, the life of a slave and stuff like this, and they're going to see exactly how horrible slavery is, because a lot of Northerners are up in the North side, with their hands in their ears going la 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 la, like pretending they don't know what's going on in slavery. But a lot of Northerners really don't. A lot of Northerners have never been to the South. A lot of Northerners have never met a black person, right? And so the concept of slavery is so abstract to them that they don't really care. But when they read Uncle Tom's Cabin about the horrors of slavery, it starts to become more personal to them, and they start to say, maybe we should do something. So Uncle Tom's Cabin is a really important piece of literature in terms of abolition. Sojourner Truth, another prominent abolitionist. She also spoke out for women's rights. Harriet Tubman, I know you've heard of her. She's an escaped slave. She's going to help other slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. We'll talk more about her when we talk about the Civil War. And then, of course, the Underground Railroad. We've heard of this before. This is not really underground, guys, but this is a method for slaves to escape from, their owners, and they would flee north. Some would go west, but a majority would go north. They would stay at, in barns and houses of people who were pro-abolition. Of course, it's all on the down low, right? But this was a method for slaves to escape their current predicament. Here's a map here. All right, and then reactions to the abolitionist movement. What's going on? The North is freaking out because all of a sudden there's these huge waves of African Americans fleeing up into the North. A lot of them are showing up with just the knowledge of farming. The ground in the North is different, right? There's not a lot of land for everyone, so there's a little bit of tension there. They're also worried that the African Americans becoming free and this whole problem of abolition is going to eventually lead to a war. They're right there, right? A lot of Northerners are going to sympathize with slaves. They're going to want to help them. They're not going to want to send them back. But as we'll talk about later this week, when legislation requires that they report slaves, this is going to add even more tension and stress to Northerners. The Southerners, on the other hand, are saying, listen, it's okay if you think slavery is evil, that's fine, but it's the way we make our money. Slave owners and a lot of Southerners are going to say this is how our economy works. And if all of a sudden the economy of half of our country grinds to a halt, it's going to be a problem for everyone. That's their argument. A lot of them are also going to argue that their slaves like being slaves, that they have a better life being slaves than they would if they weren't being taken care of. A lot of these arguments from the South are kind of cringy now, but it is important to understand that viewpoint. And they also pushed for the suppression of abolitionist material, saying that things like Uncle Tom's Cabin and stuff and Walker's work are literally just damaging their economy. So different viewpoints in different areas of the country, which we're going to continue to see, of course, up until the Civil War. So as far as our this should say objective question, not early opposition. But as far as our objective question, I wanted to go over it just to make sure, because this one's kind of abstract. So how did the abolitionists gain support? Well, they gained support through, one, the Second Great Awakening. This is going to help encourage people to speak out against slavery, to drive home the fact that slavery is evil, stuff like that. We also have some written works. Walker's going to publish some things. Lovejoy's publishing newspapers. Frederick Douglass is writing. Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? So literature is also going to help drive this movement. We also have escaping, things like the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman helping out there, and violence. A lot of these abolitionists are going to call for violence. They're going to say the time to wait around for white people to give us our freedom is over. It's time to actually rebel. This will not fix itself without violence, which was John Brown's famous argument, right? Yeah, I'm going to kill people. Yeah, I'm going to, murder, but it's for the greater good. And then the arguments against this movement are all the South's arguments. The idea is that the Southern economy is based completely around slavery and the use of free labor, and also the idea that the North, a few Northerners, right, are pushing back as well, saying, listen, at some point the North is going to be full. We can't, fight this battle. We don't want to start a civil war. All right, so that's it. Make sure to answer your objective question, and I will see you later. Bye-bye, guys.